Today, there was big news on Capitol Hill. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth publicly faced questions from Congress for the very first time since the war in Iran began 9 weeks ago. One major headline: we finally got the Pentagon's first public estimate of how much this war has cost so far. Ready? $25 billion. But of course, most of the hearing was made up of Hegseth passionately defending his boss and attacking, guess who? Democrats. Watch this.
Their nuclear facilities have been obliterated. Underground, they're buried, and we're watching them 24/7. So we know where any nuclear material
reclaiming
might be.
my time for
we're
just
watching
a quick second here. We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated?
They had not given up their nuclear ambitions.
On March 13th, in a press conference, you said, we will give them no quarter, no mercy. In order for no quarter or no survivors is a war crime under the Geneva Conventions. You understand that's murder. Do you stand by that statement?
The Department of War fights to win.
Do you know how much it will cost Americans in terms of their increased cost in gas and food over the next year because of the Iran war?
I would simply ask you what the cost is of an Iranian nuclear bomb.
I'm going to give you that opportunity.
I would simply ask you what you're playing gotcha questions about domestic things.
General George, let's talk about a guy who's a patriot. Why did he get fired?
Out of respect for these officers, we never talk about the nature of their removal. There are many, we've gotten rid of many general officers in this administration because we need new leadership.
You have no way of explaining why you fired one of the most decorated and remarkable men who's
we
ever
needed
served
new
this
leadership.
nation.
Meanwhile, President Trump told Axios that he rejected Iran's latest deal and that the U.S. blockade on Iran would stay in place until there is a deal that addresses Iran's nuclear program. Over at the White House today, the president called the blockade genius and 100% foolproof. I got the fool part down. But when it comes to markets, the price of oil jumped 6% on the news that the blockade could be in place for quite some time. The global price has now topped $118 a barrel today. That's about $50 higher than it was 2 months ago, just before the war began. Now let's bring in our nightcap. And you are going to get smarter because it is a great one. David Rode is here. MS Now senior national security reporter. Alex Wagner, MS Now senior political analyst. She hosts the podcast Runaway Country with guess who? Alex Wagner. It is a must listen. David Gura, host of Bloomberg This Weekend and the Big Take podcast, and Democratic strategist Joel Payne. He was also a senior aide for Hillary for America and press secretary for former Senator Harry Reid. Okay, David, first of all, when I hear the Secretary of Defense, the head of the Department of War say that they fight to win, that just makes me regret not applying to Princeton because maybe I had a chance of getting in too. What was your biggest takeaway? For me, the fact that they're publicly saying this thing's cost them $25 billion, God only knows what the real number is, but even this one, it's a biggie.
It's a biggie, and the real number is probably $50 billion. Adam Smith, who you showed, was texting me after this saying that's not even close to the total. The big takeaway was that the main strategies the Trump administration is using to win this war are failing. The most recent one is this boycott, which the president says is already working perfectly, and you have the price of oil skyrocketing because it's not working. It's not going to work immediately. It could take weeks or months for this to have an effect. So the whole thing was just surreal to me. And on a positive note, though, some of the best questions came from veterans who serve in Congress. Many of them were Democrats, many of them were Republicans, but it was really impressive. Representative Houlihan is a veteran. Representative Moulton.
Because they actually know the truth.
Yes, and I'm just desperately trying to pull something positive out of this hearing. And it was impressive to see that these service members, and Bacon, who's also an Air Force veteran, a Republican, asked sort of aggressive questions. But it's just surreal to watch Hegseth defending. The last thing, the whole hearing was about this budget request for $1.5 trillion. A 40% increase. This is the biggest year-over-year increase since World War II. To buy more expensive hardware so we can drop bombs and razzle-dazzle with American technology, which hasn't worked in the war against Iran.
Alex?
It just frightened me.
I mean, it's staggering to me. There's so many levels on which I'm outraged. The first is, here is the impertinence of this administration to come and send the Secretary of Defense up to the Hill and then have him chastise Democrats for asking how much this war would cost when Congress controls the purse. The audacity of asking for these trillions of dollars weeks after the president says the government can't provide social safety net services like Medicare, Medicaid, and daycare. That's not our job. I mean, the statement, the priorities that are so evident here are a real indictment of the Republican Party being, I would say, amoral. I mean, here you have Americans being slaughtered. We have no intelligence. We have no reporting on how and why American soldiers are getting slaughtered overseas. There's a 14th service member that was killed in Iran. The Pentagon has been completely opaque about the specifics of these deaths. They're opaque about the cost of this war. And then when you ask about the thing that's creating the most political headaches for them, which is the cost of gas, the response is, how much is dismantling Iran's nuclear program worth to the average American voter? I don't know. Go to the next Shell service station you see, Pete Hegseth, and when people are filling up on $5.30 gasoline, ask them if dismantling Iran's nuclear program is worth the $75 it's going to take to fill up their car.
But, David, even if that were the case, the administration hasn't explained that to the American people, not one single day. And in fact, right there, you saw Pete Hegseth when I think it was Seth Moulton who said, like, wait a minute, you either obliterated their nuclear capabilities or you didn't. And he said, no, nuclear ambitions. Yet President Trump has been saying since day one they were building a nuclear weapon. It was going to be finished in 2 weeks and they plan to use it. So even right there, none of that makes sense. And to his response of the American people are going to be so glad that there's no nuclear threat, nobody's even explained that to them, and they're paying more money for gas. And look at the most recent Gallup poll where people feel worse about the economy than they have in 25 years. That's including the recession and COVID.
There was a moment early on in this war where I think there was an effort to get cabinet officials to sing from the same hymn sheet. And I think that was in reaction to the fact
you'd
that
have to hand it out to all of them so they could learn the words.
Have to do it. They were unable to do it. There's just cacophony, and that continues till today. And I was struck by the way the secretary said, you're trying to pin me down on domestic issues, as if he can't comment on the fact that this is a huge expenditure for the American people. I mean, picking up on what you said about the impertinence, I think what was really striking about the entire hearing was how much these lawmakers had to kind of wrestle out of the secretary and the comptroller information that seemed so essential. To David's point, this incredible top-line budget number was barely talked about over the course of the hearing, but the cost of the war was something that they didn't offer up at the beginning. That had to be gotten out of them by Representative Smith. And this comes on the heels of this major report by the New York Times from a couple days ago, just laying out very clearly the fact that the arsenal that the U.S. has of these hugely expensive weapons has been all but depleted. And with that, there's the follow-on of what are you doing to maybe replenish that, or to think more seriously about the fact that you were greatly outmanned in this conflict by the fact that the nature of war has changed so significantly through Ukraine in this one.
So the administration has not been able to get the full cabinet on the same page. What about Republicans? Because in that hearing, David was mentioning it briefly, we heard from a lot of veterans. We heard from congresspeople on both sides of the aisle asking tough questions. What does that tell you?
It tells me that Republicans know that this is a loser. And, you know, Stephanie, I had two thoughts that were running through my head as I was watching this and I was processing this. The first one is, this is actually supposed to be the place where Pete Hegseth shines. Because
okay, you know what? That's a really good point.
He's supposed to be the straight from, you know, the casting couch, right? Like straight from Central Casting, supposed to be the guy that looks like a tough guy, looks like a secretary of defense.
That's why Trump picked him.
Looks like he plays that character on TV, on the latest version of the Trump show. And he completely failed at that. That's one. The second piece that I thought about was this his Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem moment? You know, when they went up to Capitol Hill, and this was the moment that they actually lost not only the hearing, but they actually lost the trust and confidence of Donald Trump and Susie Wiles and everyone in that White House. I really wondered, because the answers and the way that Pete Hegseth represented this effort was disastrous. And it was disastrous before today, but this put it out on Front Street. And I wonder if this is recoverable.
And now it's about to happen with the Senate, or he's going to have to testify before the Senate. We don't know exactly how he'll perform.
It is probably the most effective thing Democrats can do if and when they take control of one or both houses of Congress is to trot every single cabinet member up to the Hill, because each and every time these people go up there and have to face real questions from representatives, they fail. It is an embarrassment to the country to see this person, who should be a men's grooming expert, sit there and cosplay as the Secretary of Defense with no answers to the most essential and basic questions about why a war is being waged in our name.